Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jen. I work at Two Rivers Books and Weird Sisters Yarn. I'm here today with Alexandra Hill, who is a community member in St. John's, and Ilona Bannister, who is a debut author. We're here to discuss her book. Before I hand it over to the two of them to start the discussion, I just want to let you know about a few things we've had going on in the shop. We've just wrapped up our first ever community book fair for our local K-8 students. We are getting ready to announce the winners of our first ever poetry contest. That will be happening on Thursday this week. Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day, which we're super excited about. And May 1st through 9th, we are going to have a trunk show with a new set of dyers. They're called Opposite Coast Dyes. They are located both in Portland and in New York. So that'll be exciting. And with that, I will hand it over to Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you to Christine, also of New Rivers Books. My name is Alexandra Hill. I'm a resident of North Portland. I'm an enthusiastic fan of Two Rivers Bookstore, and I'm also a longtime friend of our guest author. So I'm especially excited and honored to introduce Ilona Bannister to you this afternoon.
Oh,
Ilona
hi.
grew up. Hi, Ilona.
Hi.
Ilona grew up on Staten Island and lived in New York City until she married a Brit and moved to London. She's a dual qualified U.S. attorney and UK solicitor. She practiced immigration law in the UK before taking a career break to raise her two young sons, and unexpectedly found herself writing fiction. When I Ran Away is Ilona's first novel. So I'm proud to say that I was one of Ilona's first readers, and I got to read When I Ran Away in an early form. From the beginning, I was really struck by the voice of the protagonist, Gigi. She has a really distinctive, very strongly New York inflected voice that speaks very truthfully and also with dark humor about love and about loss, about motherhood, about marriage, about dealing with the horrifying and the hilarious things that life throws our way. So when Ilona sent me the first complete version of the manuscript, I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. And I hope that everyone in the audience today is going to feel the same. So welcome, Ilona, to virtual Portland.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It is way past my bedtime here in London, but I am thrilled to be with you doing this virtually. It's really exciting. So thank you so much for having me today. That was such a nice intro. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm so excited about this. I'm really excited for you to read us some passages from your book. But before we get there, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Gigi. So, a little bit about her background, her story, but I'm especially curious to hear about how you developed her voice.
Okay. So Gigi is she's a woman on the edge, isn't she? She's a New Yorker. She's a New Yorker who is married to a British man, and they are living in South London. She's got a young baby and a young son. And one morning, everything just crashes in on her. Her world caves in. Her marriage, her feelings about motherhood and how she's recovering from the birth of her son, her ongoing grief about the loss of her brother on 9/11. It all becomes too much. She leaves her family on the doorstep in just her bathrobe and her flip-flops, and she goes wandering the streets of South London. And it's a story about what happens to her, how she got to this place. But the biggest question is, how does she come back from the edge? And will she come back from the edge? Yeah. And Gigi, she was a voice in my head for a very long time before I ever even thought about writing, before I knew I was going to write a book. She came to me, she was kind of my companion. So when I was a stay-at-home mother with two small kids, doing the daily circuit alone, spending a lot of time alone, just pushing a stroller from the playground to the supermarket and back to the house and back to the playground, just she was there talking to me. She was very funny. She and I found the same things funny, making our observations about life as Americans in Britain. So she was a reminder of home. And eventually she became the character that she is now.
I especially love in that beginning scene when she has the moment where she's like, that's it. She's had it and she's going to walk out the door. I especially love that in doing so, she trips over her husband's shoes because he walks in the door and kicks his shoes off right away. But the thing I love about that moment is that she picks up the shoes and she throws them out the door. And one of them hits a car and starts the car alarm. And I don't know, that just seems like such a fantastic moment.
It's so funny. Every time that I talk about this book, someone always asks me about the shoes because I think the shoes, there's, there's something about the shoes at the door. It's like a universally understood thing about any kind of partnership that you're in. There's something the other person does. Quite often it is shoes, but there's something the other person does that if they do it one more time, it is going to send you over the edge. But somehow we never quite get there, right? Like, my husband's shoes are by the door right now. I bet you right now, if it went downstairs, the shoes would be there. But I've never quite thrown them out the door. So it was really fun to write that scene because what if you did? What if it really was the last straw and you really did do that thing you want to do because it's been driving you crazy? So it was actually really fun to write about the shoes. And it resonates with so many people. It's so funny how everyone's like, the shoes. And I'm like, I know, the shoes.
Um, Ilona, before you read the first passage, I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit about some more about Gigi. Jen posed this really fabulous question that, Gigi is from start to finish, she is a caretaker, right? And whether or not it's part of her job title, I mean, she is a biological mother to one child, but an adoptive mother to another child, whether it's because of blood relation or not. I mean, this is something that has been part of her identity from the very beginning. Um, and I think this speaks a little bit to what you were just saying. There's a kind of dissonance that a lot of caretakers feel that runs through this book. So this feeling of constantly being in demand, but also constantly being unseen, right? And this tension, I think, really drives that fantasy that, we're talking about, this fantasy of running away, or this fantasy of, that's it, I've had it, I'm throwing the shoes out the door. So could you talk a little bit, two things here. First, was that delicious to write about? Those those moments of throwing the shoes or the moments of, going into the hotel room and not answering the phone, not answering the texts. But then the second part of that question is, pretending you were Gigi, putting on your Gigi hat. What advice would you give to others who are watching, for whom that tension becomes stronger and stronger, and the idea of running away becomes more and more appealing?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that part of the point about Gigi is that she does the thing that many of us want to do and never have done. But the point of it is, how do we prevent ourselves from getting to that point? Because she's really at the breaking point. She's really at the place where we don't want to find ourselves. And I think an important thing about that, especially after this year that we have all had, where so many people have been in that caretaking role and where we've all been inside of our homes, doing so much more in terms of taking care of families or taking care of partners or taking care of animals or whatever it might be. Um, there's so much emotional labor and administrative labor that is unseen and unpaid, and it's not valued. And that can really get to you when you are the lead caretaker in your family or in your partnership. So I think it's really key to, I mean, if I were Gigi, I would have told her a long time ago, you need to turn the valve and let the steam out a little bit every day and not let it get to this point where you are ready to explode and burst. And that's been especially hard. I think the reason a lot of people are relating to this is because if you've never reached this moment before, you reached it this year at some point. And there were all these things that went around online all the time about how you needed to take time for yourself and you need your hour of exercise. And but those things aren't possible sometimes. If you're taking care of other people, that doesn't exist, not really. So I think the important thing is to try to find it and not to think that it needs to be hours and it doesn't need to be full days and it doesn't need to be even full activities. It may just literally be 3 minutes of staring at a wall in silence, which is something I do quite often. Just stare at the wall, just just to quiet the mind. Because I think that's more realistic, especially for women who are taking care of families. There is no time to take. So it might, we have this fantasy that it always needs to be something huge. It doesn't. It's a small thing that we need to do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's been tough for a lot of us.
I think it's true. And I think that's something that I really appreciate also about the framing story of the book, that her great escape doesn't even last 24 hours. I mean,
No.
and there's something about that that's I mean, it's amazing because on the one hand, it feels so long. I mean, she's there with flashbacks and living through her story, sometimes living through it again with her as she reflects on things that are happening or that have happened. It can feel like it's been much longer, right? But it hasn't. It in the end, it isn't even the course of an entire day, which which I really appreciate. I mean, and I think that's another thing that speaks very much to us in this pandemic year, that time has no meaning anymore, right?
Yeah.
That that 5 months
No,
could be 5 years, or that 5 minutes could be an hour, or that as far as I'm concerned, it's still March of 2020.
Yeah.
That it just kept going and going, and
Yeah.
it's been the same month every day. So
Yeah.
so
And
I find that really
yeah.
interesting.
And I think the point is that she, as the mother, she's really asking for very little. She's asking just for a little bit of time, a little bit of understanding. And I think that's another thing that a lot of women feel, is the thing they're asking for is not, it's really tiny, and even that isn't given to them, and even that isn't allowed. And we don't allow it for ourselves, until we reach this kind of point where she's at. So I think that's just a really important thing to remember for the women in our lives and the caretaker in our lives, that the thing they're asking for is actually really small, and we need to make more space for it. Yeah.
Would you read the first passage for us?
Sure, I would love to. I am going to read. So we've got a flashback where Gigi's telling us about what the morning routine used to be like, when she was getting for work and Harry was getting ready for work and Johnny had to get ready for school. Gigi has terrible morning sickness, so she's very ill. But the to-do list keeps going, and Johnny needs a shoebox, of course, for school, because don't they always need those? Okay. The point was, I had done everything the night before. Packed the waterproofs with the rain boots and a named plastic bag for forest school. Signed the homework diary. Checked the spelling sheet. Packed karate uniform and after-school pre-karate snack. Labeled the water bottle. Tested him on his 5 times table. I did a knit check with a metal comb because somebody in the class has frickin' lice again. After he went to bed, I finished 3 client letters and emailed a brief to counsel. I knew I'd be throwing up in the morning, so I did everything the night before. Everything, except finding the fucking shoebox. While I washed my face between rounds of vomiting, Harry came into the bathroom in boxer shorts and a dress shirt, tying his tie and checking his shave in the mirror. "Pukes, Johnny needs a shoebox," he said. Pukes was his new nickname for me. I vomited on his business socks. "My God, are you all right, darling?" Harry said, alarmed. "I'm fine. Find him a box and change your socks." 20 minutes later, I pulled on a black dress, put on my sneakers, and put my work shoes in my bag. I did the best I could with my makeup, but it was hard to cover the spray of red dots from the broken blood vessels left around my eyes from the vomiting. Harry had left for work, and Johnny was standing at the door waiting for me. His shoes were on the wrong feet, and he'd skipped a button, so his shirt was crooked. His teeth were brushed, but his hair wasn't. He had a school bag with all his stuff. I had my work bag with plastic bags for emergency puking on the train, water, foundation, and a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos, the only thing I could keep down. "Okay, baby, where'd Harry put the shoebox?" I asked Johnny, ready to walk us out the door. He pointed to the table. "It's there, Geech. I'm not sure it's right, though." On the table was the extra-large cardboard box that we used to move our bedding from the States. I knew because it was written in marker on the side, bedding. It was 50 times the size of a shoebox. The presence of the box on the table meant that upstairs in the loft, everything that had been stored in this box was now in a huge pile on the floor. Johnny, already skilled in British understatement, said, "I think that's a bit too big, Geech." I would have screamed if my throat wasn't so raw. Instead, I sighed, opened a kitchen cabinet, took out a box of cannelloni shells, and emptied them into a bowl. Geege, what are you doing? Johnny asked, peering over the counter. Getting shit done, Johnny. Language, Geege, 1 pound in the jar, please. Sorry, remind me later. Will this be okay? I held the empty pasta box up, an acceptable substitute. That's good, thank you, Geege. I wasn't angry about the box, or the mess in the loft, or the insanity of waking up early to vomit and dealing with every last tiny detail of Johnny's life and then working 10 hours every day in a haze of nausea and Doritos and Coke. I wasn't angry at how unfair it was. I was angry because I knew a woman would never hand me a half-ton of cardboard when I asked for a shoebox. I was angry that Harry wasn't a woman.
Yay. Could you talk about this scene a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of pressures that are happening in it that I think are probably really common for a lot of parents. There is the pressure that comes from school. So much more is expected of parents and of children than it was, I think, when we were children. A constant need for extras that are put on top of a working parent's list that are really frustrating and really tiring, and something is always forgotten and something is always needed. So there's that pressure coming from the school. But there's also, I think it's kind of the conflict that a lot of couples have, where there is one parent who's the lead caretaker who takes care of those kinds of details, and there's the other who thinks that those details just somehow magically get taken care of by themselves. And I think it's a perennial argument that a lot of couples have. And here, because it's between a husband and wife, I think what Gigi is saying is that she's speaking to that emotional labor that so many women do in their relationships, in their families. They think they are the ones who keep the mental list, not just of what's going on in their work life, but also about the shoebox and the pair of socks and the labeled water bottle, the tiny, minute details that keep a family moving and that keep a household moving. And it's a lot. You keep adding tiny details to it, and it becomes overwhelming, which is why I think that so many parents and mothers in particular really can experience a burnout from having to keep everything together for themselves as well as for every single member of the family. So I think that's what she's speaking to there. And also, I'm just so frustrated by needing shoe boxes and cardboard tubes all the time for my kids that I just thought I'd put it in there for the teachers, just to let them know.
Well, and Gigi in that scene also, I mean, as you said, she's thinking about all of the things that each individual member of the household has to be juggling too. I mean, she's juggling a tremendous amount. She knows that she's going to have morning sickness, so she has to stay up late to get work done in the morning. I mean, even things like she puts on her clothes to wear to work, but she wears sneakers to get there and packs her shoes. She has to think in advance about bags to bring with her in case she needs to puke on the tube, because I'm sorry, the tube is going to make you puke. I mean, whether you're so it's, I mean, just all of these things that she's juggling herself just to get herself through the day. And that's just to keep herself upright and more or less able to do her job, and without even starting to factor in all the caretaking that she's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of women know that. They know what that list is. They have that list and they're carrying it for at least one other person, if not more. And it doesn't get acknowledged. That is work. Remembering to do all that, that is work. And that's the kind of, sort of unpaid labor of caretaking that is taken for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was wondering, before you read your next passage, whether you could talk a little bit about social class, which plays a really big role, not only in Gigi's struggles, but throughout the entire book. So she, in some ways, something I find sort of lovely about this book is that you could people might try to think of it as a Cinderella story, right? That she's a working class single mom. She's trying very, very hard to become, she's working as a paralegal. She wanted to go to law school, wasn't able to finish for a long time because of her caretaking roles. You know, even before that, she was helping to support her family and sending money home and to her parents and to her brother. So now, right, she meets this Brit who is well off and whisks her away to this new life in London. What I love about this story in part is that that doesn't solve anything, right? That's not the Cinderella story where in the end everything's happy and beautiful and wonderful. Not at all, right? Not I mean, not only not at all, but in fact a lot of that brings the class issues to the fore, right? So she seems, so she's dealing with this constantly, right? And always thinking about this distinction that you set up early in the book between Harry, her future husband, or the man who becomes her husband, but then her parents. And there's this terrific scene, you know, on 9/11 where he happens to come home with her, and there's such a clash of social classes happening in that scene. So eventually she is then living in London. She seems to be able to afford help, right? That in theory she could afford it. She could potentially afford a nanny. She could potentially afford help to have somebody clean for her. But at the same time, she seems to carry a lot of guilt, maybe shame, around her ability to afford these things now. Maybe I think also a degree of imposter syndrome, you know, that at any moment somebody's going to turn around and say, you don't belong here, your kids don't belong here. So could you talk a little bit about social class in the book?
Yeah, I think it's always very interesting, the idea that when you're raised in one class and then throughout your life as you work and become professional and you find yourself in another, that we carry the values that we're raised with around money. We carry them with us no matter where we end up in our adult life. They are ingrained. Um, and just because you have the money to then operate in maybe a new social class, it doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the dynamics there or the expectations. There's a different language. There are different social cues. And these things can all, and what Gigi shows is that these things are all, particularly because she's in another country, they're really confusing and she's unfamiliar and she's very, very uncomfortable. Um, it's also part of the reason why I wrote about it is because one of the things about the UK that maybe Americans don't realize so much is how much the class system is still very much a part of social life here. It's really it's one of the things I think an American might find the most shocking about when they come to live here, how much class still operates as a thing that defines people, literally from the moment they open their mouths, and it's distinguished by accent. Um, and so that was really striking to me as an observation to write about. So I think there are a lot of people who probably relate to this idea that your parents wanted you to do better than them. And then if you do that and you manage to do that, um, what what does that mean about your identity? Are you still the person um, who grew up at home, who was raised with those values, who feels those things? In many ways, you are, which is why Gigi finds it so difficult to ask for help or to hire help, even though she's in the position to afford it, because she's just so uncomfortable with the idea because it was so unimaginable in her own childhood. So hiring a cleaner is unimaginable because her mother was a cleaner and she knows what that job is intimately. She knows how people in that position are treated. So she's very uncomfortable with the position that she finds herself in. Um, and class is so much a part of identity. We don't always think about it that way. We think about culture and we think about race and we think about religion, but class as a definer of our values is really important for people. So when you make a shift in class, I think that a shift in identity happens too, which I think is a really interesting thing to explore, especially because she and Harry are from such different places. And that's part of why their communication is off, because he thinks about money really differently. And when you think about money differently in a partnership, that can really cause conflicts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have another passage to read for us, I
Yes,
believe.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad we talked about that because I was going to read about the cleaning lady, Stefka.
Perfect.
Um, she is one of my favorites in this book. I love Stefka. So I wanted to read a little bit of her. So this is the point at which Stefka has come into Gigi's house to help clean. And Gigi finds out that Stefka left her own children in Bulgaria when she came to the UK. She couldn't afford to have them with her. And Gigi asks her how often she sees them, and she says only twice a year. So she's got 2 little boys in Bulgaria that she only sees very rarely. I watch her quietly. This woman is standing in my house, working in my house, and somehow still breathing, even though the pain of being so far away from her boys must be killing her. She sparkles when she shows me the pictures on her phone. 2 tough little guys with buzz cuts, dark eyes like hers, and matching Nike tracksuits. Another one of them in Ralph Lauren polo shirts, one in navy and one in orange, crisply ironed, both buttons done up to the neck. The older boy with his arm around his little brother, smiling a tight-lipped smile. They're very cute. You dress them really nice, I say, noticing the aging communist wallpaper in the background. I buy the English clothes for them. They always handsome. If you know where to buy, it's good price, and my parents don't know what is style. I send package maybe every 3 months for birthdays and Christmas, of course. Christmas is most expensive time to fly, so I make package instead. Beautiful clothes, toys, and I send card that this one is from Father Christmas in UK. She works in the kitchen, now and then going over to Rocky, who gives her huge smiles. Do you mind if I sit here? Am I bothering you? I say. I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to hang out with the cleaner when she's working. I think the etiquette is to leave the house, or at least I overheard Fiona saying that's what she always does. Of course, Mrs. Gigi. It's hard to be alone all day. Cleaning is this way too. Work alone all day. She tells me about how her husband was working in the UK too, but now he drives long-haul trucks around Europe, so that's why he's not around and the kids have to stay with her parents. She talks while she works, telling me how to get rid of the rest of Rocky's cradle cat, but I don't really listen. I'm embarrassed at the state of my carpeting, the crust around the stovetop, ashamed that I can't find the energy to ever play with Rocky or be affectionate or do anything other than meet his most basic needs. I never coo at him or make him smile like this total stranger has been able to do within an hour of meeting him. Ashamed that what I want, really, if you really went down deep into what I really think and feel, is to get away from this beautiful house and my beautiful boys. Get away from them. But this woman who is scrubbing the crusted mounds of old baby food off Rocky's high chair, disgusting dried mounds of it that I never noticed, that any good mother would have noticed, would have never let get to that point because she would have cleaned up after breakfast every morning. This young woman, prying old baby food off the designer high chair, only wants to be with her kids. And she can't be. When Stefka leaves the kitchen, I follow her. I carry Rocky on my hip and lean on the doorframe of whichever room she's in, sometimes talking, sometimes not. She tells me a lot about her boys. Her pain and pride are palpable. I show her my trick for using vinegar to get the hard water stains off the chrome in the bathrooms. She shows me how to change a duvet cover in one fluid motion without struggling to make it fit. We do the pillowcases together. I gather up more laundry and start a new wash, and I mop the kitchen while she vacuums the hall, the mess I've allowed to accumulate. It's not a one-woman job. Then it's time for her to go. I'm relieved the house is livable again, but I panic when I see the stacks of papers and clutter and toys that remain. I can't face the rest of it without her. Wait, so what do I owe you for today? And I prolong the conversation with questions that have obvious answers so that she doesn't leave. If she leaves, I'll be in here alone again. Mrs. Gigi, she says, holding both my hands in hers. I come back next week. Please do not worry so much. And you do not have to clean before I come. Also, you do not have to clean with me. It's my job, okay? She winks at me. You are a good mother. It's happy boys. Baby is small. It's hard time. Very soon you will do what they say in America. Push your shits together. I see you next week. I love that. I love Stefka.
I do too. I also love how you give your characters such clear voices and accents when you read. I really enjoy that.
Oh, thank you. I can do stuff
I
though because of the baptism in my life.
exactly, exactly. What I love in that scene too is that that looking for Gigi, looking around her house, looking around at everything that has to be done, including, this, including loving her baby, right? That this thing she feels, she's very open in the book. Well, she's open with the reader, about how ambivalent she feels about this new baby.
Mm.
That she wants to feel love, she wants to feel attachment, but it's not there right now. And I find it so moving in that scene that she feels that her life can be manageable with company, right? With Stefka there, she's able to do it. She's able to start a load of laundry. She's able to, sort of, um, you know, I was going to say not do anything gigantic or heroic, but at the same time, it is gigantic. It is heroic for her at this point. She's so exhausted. She's so on the edge. And for her to be able to get up, to have a conversation, to start a load of laundry, it takes a heroic amount of energy at this point.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, she's really in a. I think that's it's something that I think a lot of women, particularly if they're at home for the first time, the loneliness that accompanies motherhood is something we don't talk about very much. Um, the if a woman's having difficulty bonding with her baby just out of sheer exhaustion, like Gigi is, it's another thing we don't talk about much. Her anger that she has at different parts of the book when she's alone with the kids, rage, we're very uncomfortable with that. Like, we're okay with the vision of a mother who might be weepy because she has postnatal depression. But of course, everything, she's able to put that aside because everything is about her baby. But I don't think that that's very realistic or very true for a lot of people. But we're so uncomfortable with the idea of a mother who might feel rage or resentment or detachment. It's so frightening to us that women in that position don't feel, they're afraid to talk about it, and they're ashamed of it. They're ashamed of those feelings. Who can they turn to? Who wants to admit that? Um, and so I think I think it was important to be honest about that, about those feelings that come up, and to give them a space, for us to acknowledge them and to begin to talk about them, because it's a part of motherhood that I think, we don't want to look at, but it's definitely there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we have time now for questions from the audience, and I believe that
Okay.
it is my job now to step back and this is not my part of the show. So thank you so much, Ilona. Thank you for reading these
Oh,
passages
thank
and having this
you.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you both. This has been super fun. I am going to go ahead and turn your camera off, Alexandra. Thank you so much for leading that conversation. That was a ton of fun. We do have one question. I want to invite anyone else who's watching to go ahead and type in a question either in the chat or under Ask a Question. So Linda asks, do you think that your own life experience as a working lawyer, like your husband, gives you a much deeper sensitivity to the burdens of motherhood because you see both sides of the picture at the same time?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think, part of what was really useful, when I was practicing, is that in the kind of law I did immigration law. So I worked with a lot of families. I worked with a lot of vulnerable people, a lot of marginalized people. And I've always been an observer of people. Um, and in that position where I was working with people who are on the outside of things, I also very much related to that. So I do think, that my legal background definitely influenced this book. It's why Gigi is a lawyer, but it's also why migration is part of the story. And my next novel, I write about migration as well, because I think there are so many interesting stories. There are so many interesting characters and voices that we tend not to hear, and that sometimes we choose not to see, which is why characters like Stefka are really important to me, that we bring those stories out, because there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said your next novel.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. It's another story about motherhood and mental illness, and also migration. Very different characters to these. We've got 4 women in an apartment building. They're all strangers to each other, but their lives begin to intersect in various ways. And it's about people who are unseen, people who we may visibly see, but whose lives we don't recognize and whose pain we don't acknowledge. So they're very different characters to the ones that were in here, but it's a lot of similar themes. And it's much more a book about the people who we don't see in the big city. Yeah.
That sounds exciting. I hope you let us know about that.
Yes, I will. Hopefully next year, or the year. Hopefully next year it should be out.
Awesome. So Samantha is asking, while writing from the perspective of a mother, your own experience as a mother obviously plays a huge role. But how much do you feel like your own mother's voice found its way into Gigi's, if at all?
It's a really good question. So what's interesting about this is that a lot of my own, I drew a lot on my own emotional experiences for this book, clearly. But when it came to kind of the voices of family members and those roles, I was extremely careful about making sure that my own mother and that my husband's parents were very much protected from this creative process. That was just to kind of preserve peace within the family. Is really important that nobody felt like they were in the book, because one of the things that happens when you write a book is that everyone thinks that they're in it. So everyone is like, well, which one am I? And that's definitely me. And then the people who are actually in it are like, that's not me. So that's an experience you have when you put something like this out. So actually, in writing those characters, I was really careful to write the exact opposite of who my own mother is and who my in-laws are. That was particularly important, that you write that they didn't feel at all like it was a reflection on them. So I had to be very creative and diplomatic.
Nice.
It's tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So I think I had one other question I wanted to ask you as I was reading through the flow of the story. Your narrative moves very smoothly without being at all chronological. And I'm curious how you came to that particular, it's almost stream of consciousness, like we're literally following her from the moment she wakes up that day to the end of the day, just her head, what's going on and what's triggering different thoughts. How did you land on that format?
Well, it wasn't the plan. So what happened was I wrote this novel. I wrote the first draft of it on a novel writing course.
Okay.
I wasn't able to get back into law. I was striking out in my interviews, and so I decided to take this novel writing class. My kids were both under 5. I was a stay-at-home mother. And I was determined that I was going to get my 7,000 words in every month, because that's what we had to do. The only time I had to write was from 5 to 7 in the morning when the kids were still in bed. And I had 3 hours every day when they were both in school, either nursery or school. And I was very disciplined about using that time only to write. But that was not enough time to write an outline or develop a structure or a narrative arc or any of those things that you're supposed to do when you're a writer. I would just, every month, I would pick a substance. So milk or tea or coffee or wine or whatever it was. And my challenge to myself was write a scene between my characters that incorporates that substance in some way and worry about how it's all going to work out later. Um, so a lot of those chapter headings are still the original ones from my first manuscript. And it wasn't until I finished the course, so it took a year to write all of that. And then when I was trying to figure out if the book was marketable, and I was talking with my tutor who was helping me to edit, that I had to figure out how I was going to stitch all of this together. So I had my characters and I had my scenes, the scenes I knew I wanted in there, but how were they going to come together? And then that's when I thought of the hotel room. Because at that point, pre-pandemic times, I think still for a lot of mothers, the fantasy of getting some time alone, is always ever present. So I thought about that as being the place where she was going to narrate for us the story of her life. So I wrote it backwards, really. Like I wrote all the action and then I figured out how it was going to work sort of a year later. It's a terrible, like really inefficient way to write a book. Like you shouldn't do it that way. That's really,
But it worked
really,
for you.
Yeah, it worked this time. It worked this time, but like do an outline. That would really have helped if I had written an outline. That would have been a good use of time. But yes, so it came about this way. But yeah, in the end, it worked. It took me that year to figure out where was she going to be when she was telling us all this. So it worked.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. This has been fantastic. If anyone has any last minute questions, go ahead and type them in, but I think we're going to wrap up otherwise. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Ilona. Thank you, Alexandra. It's been fantastic having the two of you. If anyone wants to purchase the book, again, the button at the bottom of your screen, go ahead and buy When I Ran Away. We should be getting signed book plates. Thank you, Ilona.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Early this week. So just go ahead and leave a message in the comment on your order, and we'll make sure that you get that. We do have one more question here. You wrote an article in The Guardian recently about your neurodiverse children. Could you talk a little bit about what you've learned about work from living with them?
Yeah. So my sons are 8 and 10 years old. My older son has dyslexia and ADHD, and my younger son has ADHD, which we are working on getting diagnosed right now. They are very exuberant, creative, energetic, extremely athletic children in constant motion. I am the opposite of that. I am quiet and sedentary, and I like thinking and I like reading and sitting still. But I've got these kids who are really different, and my husband, who we think also probably dealt with similar issues when he was a child. So they just have a really different way of thinking and looking at the world. And I, as sort of the only member of the family who is not in constant motion and who is extremely organized, have had to learn how to adapt so that I can so that I can work and so that they can get what they need out of their education. So we have to be very adaptable. But for me, that's also meant that I've learned to do things really differently. I've learned to write in short bursts instead of insisting on having hours to sit on my own and think. Because in the way my family operates and what my kids need from me, I don't really have that luxury of time. So I've learned to be more creative. I've learned to think while in motion. My kids and how incredibly energetic they are and how physical they are. I've learned that you can be really that physicality unlocks creativity. So I've found now that while walking and running, that is when I'm actually thinking about my characters and my plots, and they all start to come together, because that connection between the brain and the body, if you can unlock it, is really strong. So I've learned a lot from them. I've learned to work differently, and I've learned to kind of be in my space differently. I used to have everything clean around me, organized, things in piles. Everything had to be in my workspace, had to be really, really organized. But that is not possible. I live with, 2 tornadoes and like a larger one. So, so it's just everything is constantly upside down and in chaos. And I've learned to focus despite all of that. And that's actually a really great skill that I wish I had developed sooner. So, um, while we have challenges that we face with them and things that we're worried about and things that are hard for us sometimes, I think the way they think and work and the way they see the world, there's actually a lot to be gained from it. So, I've learned a lot from them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really fun.
It really has. And I think with that, I am going to wrap it up. This coming Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day. Wherever you are, we hope you visit an independent bookstore and give them some support. Again, May 1st through 9th, we're going to be hosting an online trunk show with Opposite Coast Dyes. We hope you'll check that out as well. Ilona, we wish you all the best with this book and with your second one. We hope to hear more big things from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, you too.